I'm speaking with Jules Sherred, who has written a wonderful, easy to use, fantastic cookbook. It's called Crip Up The Kitchen, which I love the name, by the way. I love the name. So we're so excited to get to talk to you today. Thank you for taking the time. I've looked through the cookbook and I'm just wondering, I mean, who did you envision this cookbook to be for?
Who share common symptoms: fatigue, brain fog, or executive dysfunction and chronic pain were the main overlapping symptoms that I wanted to tackle. Of course, it's going to work for people who have busy schedules or who just don't have, like, young families, people who want to cook more at home but don't exactly know where to start, who want people who want to have a wide variety of cuisines that are quick and easy to make. But at its heart, right, it's for disabled people who have these overlapping symptoms, because it's a lot easier to deal with symptoms than it is with like a diagnosis, right? We have more in common when we look at it from a holistic, universal design rather than I'm just going to focus on mobility issues, or I'm just going to focus on traumatic brain injury, or whatever this disability is. This is like for everyone who shares those symptoms.
Can you explain to us what is different about the structure of this cookbook
So
that sets it
yeah,
apart?
one of the things is the formatter. Like, there's a lot of front matter that looks at cooking holistically. It's not just about, okay, you have your ingredients and it's time to cook. It's about what you need in the kitchen first and foremost, like the subtitle tools, tips, and recipes is basically in those three sections. There's the tools that I recommend that you equip. Some of them are more expensive, and those are things like you ask your family, like, here's my wish list. Here you go.
Right.
Um, and then there's a whole section of tips, like how to prep your pantry, how to organize your kitchen so that you're not having to waste time and energy and create pain, trying to get your ingredients together and your equipment together while you are cooking, how to store things so you remember where they are when you have things like object permanence is an issue. I have tips to deal with if object permanence is an issue. How to store your food so that you can keep it for different types of disabilities, to accommodate disabilities. And then I get into the recipes, and the recipes have each an equipment list. So that, like a lot of people with certain types of executive dysfunction, they go into the kitchen and they're just overwhelmed by the process of gathering the equipment. Like, they just don't know where to start, and they will sometimes spend like hours, literally. And people think I'm being hyperbolic. That, yeah, like when I say that, but there are people who literally spend hours, and then they will think that they have everything, and they start to cook, and they realize they've forgotten something, and then they go off and search for that thing, and then their food is burning. And so there's this whole energy, pain, expenditure happening that could be taken away. So there's the equipment list, so people know exactly what to get, and they're not wasting time there. Then there's a reminder to mise en place and prep, because that saves time. And unlike other recipes, like say there's a recipe calls for 6 cups of water, and you're using 2 cups in one step, 2 cups in another step, and 2 cups in another step. In the ingredient list in typical cookbooks, they will say 6 cups of water, and then they will be surprised a step by breaking it up in the instructions, which again is not good for certain types of neurodivergencies. So my ingredient list breaks everything up. So there's no surprises when you get to the instructions for, oh, I didn't prep for that. Like, what do? I don't have 2 cups of water. I have six. Like, that's a real stumbling block for people. And then the instructions are broken down. So it's really one step per step instead of typical cookbooks where it's like 10 steps hidden in one step. And that is also overwhelming for neurodivergent brains. So it just breaks
Mhm.
things down a lot more, so people aren't, again, trying to sort out a whole bunch of stuff at one time. It's more digestible. It looks like more steps, but it's not. It's just the way that it's broken out. And then anything that would affect your shopping list, or make you change the way you have to cook, like all the tips and things like ingredient swaps, or at the top of the recipe instead of at the bottom. Because what happens a lot of the time with typical recipes is they will read the ingredient list and they're like, well, there's things in here that I like, I'm vegan or vegetarian and this is meat based. I can't have this, and they won't bother to read the rest of the recipe. So I have like the substitutions. Like if you want to make this vegetarian, here, like I make it right there so people don't automatically say, no, this recipe isn't for me. So those are like the major differences to kind of alleviate some of the points of failure that typically come up for disabled people when they're cooking.
Right, right. So, so my favorite part of cooking is the prep.
Hmm.
And I love to go to the farmer's market, buy all my veggies, or go to the grocery store or wherever, come home, get everything prepped up into different sizes, and, just thinking about what I'm going to cook that week or whatever
Hmm.
like that. What is your favorite part of cooking?
I like all of it just because, so I'm autistic and I really like order and rules and doing things systematically. I have systems for everything. And so like when I am stressed or if I'm having a really bad anxiety day, the first thing I want to do is go cook because it's just me and what's in front of
Mhm.
me. And because it is such busy work, it doesn't allow the stress and whatever is triggering my anxiety to creep in.
Mhm.
And so for me, it's a go-to. I'm having a really anxious moment. My kitchen, like I have again, like I have tips to keep your pantry and everything well stocked, so that we're having these moments where I need to cook something to calm down. You always have something on hand that you can cook. So I have always like some go-tos, like butter chicken's one of my go-tos. It's like, okay, I'm stressed out. I need 10 minutes, and it's really 10 minutes to prep my butter chicken. And in that 10 minutes, it just allows me to like, okay, I'm safe. There's nothing. It's me and the food, and we're good to go. So that's my favorite thing about cooking.
Good. I love it too. And I also enjoy it when the folks, when people eat my food and they
Mm,
just,
yeah.
they light up. I'm sure you probably love
Yeah,
that
no,
part of it too.
I love cooking for other people way more than I love
Hmm.
cooking for myself. Like that's my joy in life is to cook for other people.
I'm also
Hmm.
neurodivergent. I like to get in there and dive and just be in the things I feel like I can
Yeah,
control, right?
yeah,
And
yeah.
to keep me less stressed. Um, so I've never tried to write a cookbook. I love recipes. I love cooking, obviously, and all of those things. Can you tell us a little bit about the process of writing the cookbook? I mean, did you have any big, major hurdles that you had to overcome or problems that you needed to solve?
Writing a cookbook's a lot of work, and I don't think people understand how much work it is. I was recently um doing a consult with somebody who wanted to do a cookbook and they thought they would be able to get it out, like self-publish it in like a month. I'm like, no, no. Like for every recipe, you have to cook things at least 10 times to make sure that once you do the steps, it has to be you have to be able to duplicate it and without failure. So you have to keep repeating it and repeating it and repeating it until you get it down to a point where there's no failure. And then you have to give it to other people for them to test and to make sure that because if just because you can do it doesn't mean is that other people can do it. And then they will find points of failure. And then you have to tweak it again to make sure that most people are able to cook it without failing, without having either something not rising or in my instance getting a burn warning on the Instapot. So these things that have to be tested and tested and tested. And then there's a specific way that cookbooks have to be written. And they have like things have to be like when you have a publisher, you have an editor who watches out for these things and can find the inconsistencies or things that don't make sense. But there's a lot of work. Like cookbooks take about 3 years from beginning of recipe to the end. And then photography, right? It's like for every one image, there's at least 8 hours of work behind that one image. So it's a lot of investment. So if you want to self-publish, I recommend that people learn how to take food images on their camera that would be do well because you need to have food images. People let you first to eat with your eyes. People want to be able to know what they're going to eat, how it should look like, especially if they're new to cooking. They don't have to be beautiful, but they have to look appetizing, which is a whole other thing. And then
Yes.
you need to find testers. And my advice to people who want to do it themselves instead of going to a publisher is do like 10 recipes per PDF, and just have it like here is maybe your dinners for a week or some type of meal plan. Um, and start off there and see how much work that little 10 recipes is. Um, and you also need to write like little paragraphs or two about the dish, right? Like people want to know why you're including it, what you love about it. I have some longer food histories that doesn't need to be that. You still have to have a paragraph or two of head notes about why that recipe is there. It can't be just simply because I love it. There needs to be more. So if you can do that, and you think you have 10 recipes, most cookbooks have 100 recipes in them. So it's like 10 times more work. Mine has 50 because it's like a single specialty cookbooks, and those are allowed to have less recipes, but they are a lot of work. I started developing my cookbook. I mean, I was on a rush publication schedule, but I started developing the recipes in 2018, and the book came out in 2023. So that's still, I'm normally in a, if I lucked out, I found a publisher really easily. It went to press in 1 year. Normally it takes 3 years if you go publishing for a cookbook. So in if things didn't go my way, this book would still be like 2 years out in the future before coming out. And I started developing it in 2019. So that's how long it takes.
Wow. Wow. Goodness gracious. So, well, it's obvious that there's a lot of work has been done. I'm
Hmm.
telling you, all you have to do is look at the first few pages, and I'm like, I mean, I just went, whoa, how in the world do you make this happen? I mean, it just seems like so much information, and it all came from you. You know,
Hmm.
it's obvious, it's very specialized. And uh, what would be your message, I guess, that you would want folks to take away from, somebody who looks at this cookbook, buys the cookbook? What's kind of a big takeaway that they could
The
have?
the biggest takeaway I want people to have is that you're enough as you are, and you do not need to overcome anything or push through things. I have my whole system for the book is you assess your body, you check in, and you figure out what you can do based off of your energy in that moment. And don't try to push through it, because when you try to push through it, that's when injury happens. That's when you end up being like spent and in bed for days and days and days because you've done too much. It's all about accepting who you are, meeting yourself where you are, being mindful, loving yourself, and being like, if all I can do is like put a bunch of cans in like empty cans and make soup and spend 5 minutes. If that's all I can cook today, bravo. Like you did something. If you have to order in, that's fine. If you, like I say, get those frozen vegetables, if that's what you need to do to be able to feed yourself, they're just as healthy, if not healthier, than the ones that are in the fresh food aisle. Do what you need to do. And all that messaging that we receive from society that we're lazy is BS. Like everyone has limits. Everyone has a point where they are going to break. Um, those of us who are disabled are often to break ourselves constantly to try and fit ourselves into an ableist world. And my message is like, no, like don't. Um, Respect your boundaries. We all have them, and you respect other people's boundaries. So love yourself like you would love other people, and do what you can do. And congratulations, like you're not lazy. You're taking care of yourself, and that's what matters.
I love that answer. I love it. So, what's your favorite recipe in the book?
It would have to be the Duke of Borscht recipe. That's the one that has the most heart for me. Duke of Bor people are a religious sect from Russia, and they were persecuted, and they came to Canada. The Canadian government invited them here a long time ago.
Right.
And then they were free here, and they also have a history of persecution in Canada, which I go through in the book. And my second set of grandparents, they were Duke of War. And so my summers were spent in their at their house. And my favorite recipe or memories were of my baba, which is Russian for grandma. Sitting at her. work table in the kitchen and preparing dukkha borscht. And then later on the summer, we would go back to that area of BC because there's like the whole economy of a certain area in BC is based on dukkha borscht, and it's different than other borscht that a lot of people. It's vegetarian. There's it is cabbage based, not beet based. And so a lot of people are not familiar with it. But for me, it's home and it's excruciatingly long. Like it's like I have to have a lot of energy and it's like, okay, that's what I'm gonna cook this week, and that's it. I'm gonna rely on my food stocks the rest of the week because it wipes you out. But it's worth it, right? Like to me, it says love, and so it's one of those things that I like try and make once a month, and I jar it, and that way I have my grandmother's hug whenever I want.
Oh, I love that. I love that. So I am obviously, if you can't tell from my accent, I live in South Carolina,
Hmm.
in the South, the southeastern part of the United States. And my grandmother was from Tennessee, and her my favorite dish of hers was fried chicken.
Mm.
And I'm not, it's not like I'm a great fried chicken
Hmm.
eater. I mean, I'm from the South. I
Yeah.
like it. Okay. But it's the same thing when and I can't replicate it. I've
Hmm.
tried, brining it the way she did and all of these, but yeah. So I love that you can capture, your grandmother's love. That's just fabulous. So I saw in the book that you talked about Pantrify,
Hmm.
an app that
Yeah.
you use to sort. So, I looked at it and I'm not really sure how to get started, and I haven't done a lot of
Yeah.
searching into that. But do you still use that? Is that
Yes, I
something
do.
you would still recommend?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
it
Good.
takes a little bit to set up, but you create rooms or you can organize it however you want. So I have my work kitchen, which is the kitchen that I use when I'm recipe developing and cooking, and like my studio kitchen, and then we have our house pantry, right? So I have two different pantries, and they are each stocked differently. And my partner has ADHD, so I like things to be very specifically placed. They don't work that way. Their brain is like, I'm just gonna dump things, and things live in piles. And so in our shared pantry, I've created piles of sorts. So instead of having like tomato products here and this like very specific, it's just like, okay, canned goods in this family will belong in this section. And dog food making stuff will belong instead of like being very so that things come into the house, they get scanned, they get put in their piles. There's pictures of those piles so that I can basically not be hunting, spending like 20 minutes, like, where is this thing? Because they put it somewhere that I would never. So it kind of helps
Right.
us both. And then when I'm doing grocery shopping, when I'm like working on a project or recipe developing or whatever, like I always know what I have in hand because as I take something out, I rescan it. It removes it from my inventory. When I'm sitting down to do shopping lists, I just have to open up the Pantryfy app and I know exactly what I have without having to walk and look and do like a count. I set reminders for when things are going to be after Best Buy date so that I can make sure that I use them so I'm not doing food waste. There's all these different ways you could do it with, like if you wanted to um for house insurance purposes, right? There's even other ways of doing it. Keep an inventory of the expensive things in your house so that if you ever, heaven forbid, your house burnt down or whatever, you needed to have an insurance claim, you have all those scanned and pictures taken in the Pantryfy app per room. And then you can just share it very easily with other families via your Google account, shared Google family account, so that other people can add to it, remove for it. You can also set it up to create automatic shipping or shopping lists. That requires a little bit more programming know-how, but if you have somebody who can help with that, then it's also one of those things where you don't even have to write out shopping lists. It will do it automatically for you. So when you go to the store, you just look at it and like, oh, these are the things that I need because the app tells me I need it. It works for us, especially because there's not only one person doing the shopping. And so it's one of those things is like, I'm doing shopping. What do you need? There's always that I don't know what I need, right? But with this app, like you always know what you need. And so anybody can pick up the shopping list and go and not have to worry about forgetting something because you didn't write it on. Like we also have a shared list on the fridge, but stuff gets forgotten. I have a
Yeah.
rule that when you're down to two of something, you put it on the list. My partner, that doesn't stick with them. So things don't always make it on the shopping list because they forget the rule. If there's two of something left, stick it on the list.
Well, I love that too. If you were, you suddenly fell ill or you had a
Yeah,
surgery or something like that, it would be easy to share that
yeah,
with someone to, like you say, do the shopping for you
yeah.
or whatever. Yeah, I really like that. So, okay, now I've got your actual endorsement in person. So I'm going to download that and try to work on it myself. What is a question that you've not been asked that you wish you would be asked about this book? What is something you want to share, maybe that I haven't asked you or someone else hasn't asked you that you think is helpful to get more folks interested in the book?
I get a lot asked about like the disability part of it, but another thing that I wish I got to talk more about were the food histories behind um behind the dishes that I create that I chose. I talk about it a bit in the introduction. Like Canada is a very multicultural society, and a lot of the dishes that we enjoy are because of new Canadians that come here and share their cuisines with them. But it's often at the hands of violence. Either they're here because of war or because of like effects of colonization, or like we have a large South Asian population because of the partition of India and Pakistan. And even though, like we white people, we have like easier, our foods aren't really. Sorry, my phone's making my alarm. Um, our histories of food are a lot easier to pass it down. When we get displaced, we don't lose that. And people who get displaced, their food cultures are much more ingrained. Um, you have important discussions over food. Like even those of us from Eastern European backgrounds, right? We do all the important things around food because it's easier or more difficult to get upset with people when you're eating and your stomach is full and you're happy, right? Um,
Right.
you share fellowship over food with your community. You do all these things with food. And when you're disabled, the first thing you lose access to are those communal pieces, and food is an important thing. And when you're a new Canadian or a new American or an immigrant or whatever, you're already losing one connection when you come here. And when you're disabled, you'll lose that connection even more. And so I think it's important for a lot of reasons that we understand where our food comes from, the good and the bad. And it's not to like shame people into like, oh, I should feel bad because I have the privilege of not worrying about this. It's just to be mindful of like these are the stories behind these food. Like we're very lucky that we get to enjoy in instance the samosa as one thing, or like my Dugabor borscht recipe. Like we're lucky that that recipe survived because the government did not want it to survive. And so here we are, we're enjoying it, and we should be thankful for that, right? So that's just learning a little bit more about where our food comes from, and why it's important that these foods exist, and why other cultures share these things with us freely and openly, and how it makes our fabric of society that much more rich and enjoyable.
So, what's next for you?
I just finished writing a fiction, young adult contemporary fiction book that can't talk about it much. We're hoping to sell it to a publisher sometime in the fall or early spring. So, and then I'm also developing another cookbook that is involved with baking and air fryer, which is really difficult. Air fryers dry out your food. So, and it's going to involve explorations of grief, which may sound sad, but I had a familiar family lost unexpected earlier this year, and all I wanted to do was bake. But it's one of those things that again, like we grieve over people, but we also come together in food and baking, and it's one of the first things that people bring to you when you have a loss is baked goods and things that make you feel good. So I'm gathering people's stories about like the foods that they think about the things that they want to eat when they're grieving. Their stories about like maybe their grandmother died and this is what their grandmother, whatever it be, right? Just stories about grief and food, but happy, right? This is like you can be sad. Grief is not bad, and let's rejoice in, because if you're grieving, it means you love somebody, and that is good, right? So it's just exploring the intersections of grief and baking.
How can we help promote your book?
Um, if people, so word of mouth is still the number one way that people buy books. So if you bought it and you loved it, tell people about it. If you bought it and you loved it, review it where you bought it, because reviews also, like firsthand reviews from people who actually bought the book. So like leave those Amazon reviews, Goodreads, or wherever. If you bought it from Barnes and wherever you bought the book from, leave a review, because reviews help people who come buy it to figure out if this book is for me or not.